Hello, this is Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay'a, and today we have a programme about non-duality. And I have in the studio with me Jefem Foster.
Hi.
Hi, Jeff. And Jeff got quite a story to tell in one way, and he's also a fascinating man. And I'm just going to ask him to start with, Jeff, what is non-duality?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? To me, the word non-duality, it means not two, and it points to this sense that somehow everything is one. Although it appears as though that there's separate things in the world. I'm a separate person. I'm an individual with a past and a future, and these are all separate objects. Actually, it's all one. And oneness is not separate from what's happening. So it's like the spiritual search of ours is it's really the search for oneness. It's the search for completion, the search for unity. And
we all somewhere have that. I know it's inside me. It's this thing. We realise that we want something more to feel better or to feel complete. It's a very human thing to have in one way.
It is, yeah. And and this seeking begins out of the feeling of separation. It's because I feel separate from oneness that I begin to seek. And in the material world, it's the search for money, fame, better relationships, a stronger sense of self, and in the spiritual world, it's the search for awakening, enlightenment. Really, it's the same search. It's the search for completion, the search to come home. And what I talk about really is the fact that you never left home, and that oneness it's all there is. And it's here now, and we're not separate from it. And when that's seen, the whole search for something more just falls away, it just burns up.
And when that happens, what does it feel like?
Well, it's very difficult to talk about because, when that happens, in the falling away of the separate self, you're not there. So you're not there to experience it.
So when you say you're not there, what does that mean?
I mean, to put it in simple language, I guess you could say that the past and future aren't there. This heavy sense of, me being a separate person in the world. There's just what's happening, so and there's no one there to know it. It can't be known. It's like a plunge into the unknown, which is where we always are.
But you still think, or thinking still happens about the past and future, but you're not identifying with that. Is that how you would say it? Or?
Yeah, thoughts still arise. Thoughts can arise, and it's just that they're not a problem, because there's nobody there trying to get an identity out of thoughts, because that's all we seem to do. We go out in the world and we grasp at things, and we try and make ourselves into something. That's really the human condition, you could say. It's the search to be someone, the search to be something, the search to possess, to grasp, And so when that falls away, it's like everything is just released to be itself, without the grasping. Without the grasping. And so in that, anything can arise. Thoughts can happen, sounds can happen, smells can happen, feelings in the body can happen. But there's no sense that any of it is mine. There's no sense that I'm a separate entity who's in control of this. It's like sounds happen, but there isn't a separate person there who thinks, I'm hearing, I'm doing it. So it's almost like the me at the centre of my life is seen to be an illusion. Life is seen to have no centre. But it doesn't mean that life stops. It doesn't mean that life stops. People have this idea that once awakening happens, everything somehow stops. It's like a full stop. It's absolutely not. It's an opening up to what is. It's an allowing of what is, but it's not something that you're doing, and that's almost the hardest thing to hear.
And what happens to your personality?
Well, it's the personality that's seen through. The personality, it's seen that there's nothing fixed there. There's nothing fixed called me.
But the personality, I presume, it's like a program that's still running, and you've still got your likes and your dislikes.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just that you're not charged so much by them. They're not dominating you.
It becomes very, very playful. You can play. It's like I can play at being Jeff. you know, when it's needed. You know, I can play at being Jeff. But really this Jeff character, you know, where is he? You know, it's just a thought happening now. And that's not something, you know, it's not a special state that I'm in. This is true for all of us, you know. But it's the hardest thing to see, of course, that you are just a thought. Your whole past and future, it's just a thought arising now.
Are you aware of the personality that you're seeing changing over time? Does it become more refined? Does it lose certain charges? Does it expand? Are you aware of any changes?
I mean, it's difficult to talk about. You know, it's difficult to talk about without making me sound special. You know, this is, you know, awakening it's very ordinary. It's a collapse back into what there already was. You know, this has always been here. Awakening, it's always been here. It's just that we couldn't see it. I think that's the point. You know, we were so lost in this seeking game that we couldn't see what was there in front of us. You know, and this is oneness already. So it's like the secret of spiritual awakening is hidden right where we are. And it always has been. But we can't see it because we're looking for it.
No, I have a feel for that. The reason I particularly asked that last question was that I've spent some time with people that are in a well, they feel they're in an awakened space, realised space, whatever you call it, enlightened space. And there's no doubt there was something special. I don't mean special insofar as, yeah, I do mean special, extraordinary. Extraordinary insofar it was different from where other people lived, the way other people lived. And yet, at times I would see that their personality would take over. Not necessarily for a long time, but there was influence there. And I'm always interested, and I understand how that can happen, but I'm always interested in the possibility of maybe the personality developing so it doesn't have any kind of hold over the where you'd say the person, it's not really a person, I can get that to a degree, but it doesn't have some kind of influence.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in the seeing of this, in the seeing that essentially there's no me at the centre of my life. There's no. I mean, this is the foundation on which our whole lives are built. That there's a me there,
Absolutely.
and everything stems from there.
Absolutely.
So, when that falls away, in the clear seeing that there's only oneness, the mind or thought or the personality or whatever you want to call it, there can still be a momentum to that because all the mind's known is seeking throughout its whole life.
Right.
So that can come back in. You know, it's almost like the moment you think you're awakened, you're not. You know, the moment you think you're awakened, you're not, because the mind's going to come back in.
Because you think you're awake.
You think you're awakened.
You think you're special. You think you're separate.
As long as you think you're awakened, there's a you who thinks they're awakened.
I get that.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing to let go of. You know, there was a time where I thought I was enlightened. You know, and I went around writing about it and telling people about it. And you know, even that was just a belief. It had to be. Even that was still separation. I'm enlightened, you're not. I'm enlightened, you're not. Separation, you know? And there was a superiority with that. There was the sense that I had got something special. You know, even that fell away, because even that isn't real. You know, that's almost the final illusion to fall away, but it's still an illusion. And you know, the ego loves that. The ego loves to feel that it's enlightened and go around the world telling everyone that they're enlightened.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's a great party trick, isn't it?
It is. You know, and what was seen over here anyway was that there is no I who could be enlightened or not.
Does this stage develop? Stage is not the right word probably, but does this state, does it develop? Does it evolve? Do you feel changes now? Do you feel there's a movement?
You know, really there's only this, there's only what's happening, and everything else falls into the background, you know. And then you see in this, it's already complete. It's seen that life is already complete, you know. And in that seeing, yeah, you know, the stuff that isn't real just falls away. It just burns up, you know. And that can seem to take time. But really it's seen in clarity. There's only now, there's only this. So in that, the story of a Jeff who changes, even to talk about it just doesn't feel real to me.
I remember talking to someone, and something very significant happened there with them, and they said it's like the background became the foreground, and the foreground became the background. It's like reference points almost shifted, and there was such a strong new reference point that things, they used the word like you, things burnt away, drifted away, and they saw, or life was seen from a different point of view, was seen from a different, reference point, if you like.
Yeah. And it's also seen that this has always been here. It's not actually a different reference point. I always say that, I say, babies see this, newborn babies see this.
So when they're born, they don't actually feel separation.
Exactly.
They feel interconnectedness.
Yeah, well, they don't even feel that, because there's just what's happening.
Yeah,
there's no one there who sits around and goes, I feel connected, I feel at one. No, there's just the spontaneity of what's happening. And as adults, we seem to move so far away from that spontaneity, that sense of aliveness, that simplicity, in our search to be someone in the world. And we become very separate, very, very heavy. Very heavy, and we just miss this. We miss what's happening because we're too busy looking for something more, and it's always for me.
But isn't that part of the game?
That's the game.
Growing up. And is there any way out of that? Can a baby stay in that space? I suspect not, but I don't know.
I think it's possible, but there's no mistakes in this. There's just no mistakes in oneness. This game has to play itself out. The separation has to happen, the suffering, in order to be seen through. It's like the suffering, the separation is trying to wake us up. And I look back on my life, and the intense suffering that I went through and the intense seeking. At the time, it was horrible. Looking back, it had to happen. There were no mistakes. It was there to wake me up. Full stop.
So I know when we were talking earlier, before we started recording, you were talking a little bit about your life earlier, when you went through periods, very difficult periods, where you were very unhappy and depressed, and you were exploring meditation and self-inquiry to try and find a way, understandably, find a way out of the uncomfortable feeling that you had.
Absolutely. The search was a search for an escape from this misery that I was experiencing. I mean, really, my whole life I was miserable, but it reached a pinnacle. Really, it reached kind of a point of breakdown in my mid-20s, and there was such intense suffering, misery. Everything, the futility of everything was seen.
So, what actually made you miserable? It was the futility of life. Was that the core of the? Well,
it was really the heaviness of being a separate person. I really felt that separation. I felt very lonely. I felt that the world didn't care about me. I could never really find any relationships. I was always very alone.
So it didn't. The game didn't work for you.
It didn't work. No, it didn't work. I mean, I was blessed with an intellect. I was quite clever. Apart from that, really, I hated myself. It was plain and simple. I hated who I was. I hated the way I looked. It was just, life felt like a burden, and I never wanted to get out of bed in the morning because it was too much. It was all too much, and I think really my whole life, more or less, I'd experienced this, and of course I never recognised it at the time. At the time, growing up, I just thought, well, that's who I am. This is my lot, this is...
But did you ever try and fix the personality as such? Because people might argue that you were unhappy because your personality wasn't properly formed, and you'd had bad experiences in your childhood.
On the surface, I had quite a happy childhood in a way. My parents were lovely to me. I always had everything I needed, but it was on the inside. It was on the inside. It was just it was always too much. I hated who I was, and there seemed to be no escape.
But Jeff, when you say you hated who you were, how did you see who you were?
Well, that's the problem. I knew who I was.
And when you say you knew, you're saying that within the definition of the area that you were separate from everybody else, and you felt there was something else there that you couldn't get in touch with.
Yeah.
You couldn't, from where you are, grasp it. Is that?
Yeah, I always felt like a very small person in a big world, you know.
Okay.
I felt insignificant. And I think really that's the separation taken to an extreme was where I kind of ended up. You know, we all feel that to some extent, that we're a small person in a big world, and there's suffering and there's death to look forward to, you know. But I had...
It's quite a statement, that it's death to look forward to as a way out.
No, I meant that in a ironic way, you know. It's we all believe that we're separate people who were born and who are going to die.
Well, do we really believe that? We kind of know it, but we try not to. We just think, well, not me.
Yeah.
You know, the thought of most of us, the thought of death is something, well, we know it's going to happen, but, not yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So
and maybe not me.
Yeah, you know, we try and push it aside, we don't think about
absolutely,
it.
Yeah.
But it comes out in other ways, actually. It comes out in the suffering, in the anxiety. Essentially, it's all an escape from death, which is really an escape from being nothing. You know, that's why we fear death, because it's a plunge into nothingness, and nothingness can't be known. And the mind operates in the realm of the known. And we fear what we don't know.
And we don't understand.
And we don't understand.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, really.
Yeah.
Because what we know, we can control.
Yeah.
And what death is really showing us is that there is no control. You know, there is no control. And death and illness have a funny way of showing us this. That really, you know, there's something else going on here, and it's beyond our control. And so that's why we spend our lives, although we don't recognise it, trying to escape this this knowing, actually, that we are nothing. I think on some level we all know this because we've all been newborn babies. We've all known that openness, that innocence, that sense of not being anything in particular.
If we can remember it.
Yeah.
I know for myself that's very difficult to remember anything from that time.
Yeah. But the point is, we've all been newborn babies.
Yes,
we've all been newborn babies.
Yeah.
And essentially that hasn't been lost. It's just become obscured by the seeking game, by the illusion of being a separate person in a big world, separate from oneness. And it's out of that illusion, it's out of that assumption, really, that everything begins, that the suffering, the human suffering begins, you know. And really, for me, it reached a critical point, this suffering and this separation. And that's when another possibility started to open up. But for me, in my particular case anyway, it had to reach that point of, you know, despair.
So it went to the extreme, and then something was able to flip or
well,
open,
yeah, it was either... I mean, it became so clear to me, it was either change or commit suicide. You know, there was no other option.
Pretty dramatic.
Yeah, there was no other... It was change or suicide.
But that sounds like it was... When you say that was the kind of option, that sounds like it was your decision to do that.
Well... In the telling of it, you know, it always sounds like we have choice. Of course, we never do. It had to happen the way it happened, you know, and, you know, there's no mistakes in this. You know, we think that's the illusion, really. That's where all the suffering begins, is with the illusion of choice, that I'm a person who can choose, and that everything that happened could have happened differently, you know, which implies that this, you know, shouldn't be the way it is. You know, if it's like when it's seen that it couldn't have happened differently, that's the same thing as saying this couldn't be any different. This has to be the way it is.
But Jeff, when you say that you saw it was either change or suicide, was there something that you felt, you did's probably the wrong word, but was there like a decision made? Was there something, it must have impacted you somehow inside? Because that's a very dramatic place to get to.
Well, I mean, the point
as a human being.
I was too afraid to kill myself, you know.
So you had no
choice. I had no option.
Yeah.
It's a terrible situation to be in.
Yeah.
But, you know, in hindsight, thank God it happened, you know, thank God.
And then when you reached that point, did something significant happen fairly quickly, or was it another period of time, or...?
Well, you know, it reached a critical point of misery, and then I got physically quite ill as well. I got glandular fever, quite a serious case of it. And I mean, I'll tell you how it happened. You know, one night I just I collapsed in my bathroom, and I'd been vomiting blood, just out of nowhere. This, you know, and I collapsed on the floor, passed out, woke up. I don't know how much longer later, in a pool of my own blood. And I tried to move, and I found out I was paralysed. And it was like, you know, I'm going to die. That's it. And it was something about that, I think. It was something about that, the sense of how precious this life is and how quickly it can be wiped out, you know. Yeah. Something about that stuck with me.
Yeah.
And a few days later, you know, I was lying in hospital, I was feeling better, you know, they were treating me. And I think it was something about that experience of how, you know, it's like my whole life I had never realised how precious it was to actually be alive. I'd just taken it for granted, you know, that the simplicity of the fact that I'm alive at all was just ignored, you know, in my search to be someone, in my misery. It was like, so it was something about that experience that, you know, it's like that taste of death and how close it was and how easily all this can fall away. It's like something about the impermanence of what we take to be our lives. Because this illness, it came out of nowhere. It just came out of nowhere. And that was, at the time, that was terrifying. You know, how easily it can be taken away. And, and a few days later, I was lying in my hospital bed, and, you know, my whole life I had been a committed atheist. You know, the word spirituality, it meant nothing to me. You know, it meant witches and goblins and ghouls or something. I didn't know, you know, that's what the word spirituality meant. Religions were, you know, it was all ridiculous to me. And for the first time in my life, you know, I remember there was a Bible by the side of my bed. And for some reason I just found myself picking it up and looking through it and reading the words of Jesus. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't just a bunch of words. It wasn't just some man-made nonsense, you know. There was something in it. There was a resonance there. There was something about eternal life, something about the preciousness of this, something about something beyond us. I didn't know at the time. I didn't know. But the point is there was no choice in that. And that's where it all began. That's where the seeking began. It was to find this, whatever it was.
Right.
This resonance, but to find it out there.
And when you say the seeking began, what form did it take then?
Well, for me it was very much... I mean, I've been a seeker my whole life. You know, the mind is a seeker, you know. But at that point, it was when my spiritual seeking really began. And, you know, I started off just by... I found myself doing this. There was no choice in it. You know, once that spark had been lit, there was no way of going back, you know, and I moved back to Manchester with my parents, and I shut myself off in my room for about a year. And it started off with... well,
that's quite extreme in itself, almost shutting yourself off for a year.
I was a very extreme person, yeah. Well, you know, I was blessed or cursed, I don't know, you know, with a very strong intellect. I was very clever. So once I got my hands on something, I had to tear it apart, you know, I had to go right into it. That was my nature. So once that fire began, it was, you know, it was very, very intense. It was like a fire that started to burn, and, you know, I couldn't put it out. And I started off with very basic books on Buddhism, Christianity, on books on meditation, very basic stuff, and then books on meditation, on self-inquiry. I mean everything, just everything, and I mean everything. You know, I tried everything. And
when you say you tried it, you would like do a certain meditation technique for a time, a certain religion for a time,
yeah. And there were, I started to have all sorts of spiritual experiences. You know, glimpses of oneness, falling away of the self. You know, just intense compassion. You know, breaking down, crying for hours at the beauty of the world. You know, and there were times of great despair as well, seeing the impermanence of everything, seeing that I wasn't there, seeing that, you know, in a sense, the whole thing was futile. So it was it was a very tumultuous time. It was a very dramatic time, you know, and there was old beliefs started to fall away that I'd had for lifetimes, you know, when I started to see that I wasn't who I thought I was.
And did you feel basically positive about what was happening, or did it scare you, or...?
Well, I can't say I felt positive about it. It wasn't particularly pleasant, actually. It was at the start, it was all very exciting, and it actually got quite nasty towards the end because the seeking became so intense. But also, I knew I couldn't give it up. You see, I knew I couldn't give it up.
Yeah.
I knew that.
So when you say it got intense, you would do more extreme things like meditate for longer, or?
It was just in a sense of how much I'd shut myself off from basic, ordinary life,
Okay.
an ordinary human
like a
relationship.
ground in a way.
Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, I don't remember a lot about those times because so much happened and so much fell away, and I went through all sorts of state. I became a militant vegan at one point. You know, I was just exploring this exploring everything, looking for the answers, because I realised the answers couldn't be found in the way I'd been living my life, and they couldn't be found in having a nice job and finding a nice girl to marry. You know, or it couldn't be found in the ways that I thought it could be found. You know, it was a clear seeing of that, and it did reach a point of such intensity. I became, my whole identity was now I was a spiritual seeker. That was me. So I changed my old identity, you know, for a new identity.
Yeah.
What I couldn't see then, you see, it was just as much of an identity as ever. You know, the spiritual seeker. I'm the spiritual seeker. It's still an identity. It's still something to cling to.
But it had opened your world.
Yeah.
Somehow, given you new possible horizons. I say you as an individual, but there was a movement there somehow.
Yeah, it had opened so much up, and yet there was still very much the sense of being an individual who was looking for something.
I understand that.
That was still there, very much.
Yeah.
Probably heavier than ever, actually. You know, at least I wasn't so miserable anymore. But I was kind of miserable in a different way because I hadn't reached enlightenment yet. I hadn't awakened yet.
You were very driven.
Very.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, people who come to my meetings these days and they ask me questions like, I've asked all these questions already. I've done everything. You know, I've done this seeking thing. You know, I asked every question known to man. I really did. And I mean, I think the point is I never found the answers. You know, well, I did. I found answers, and then the seeking would start again. There seemed to be this incessant movement into a future. You know, it was this constant looking for something that I thought I'd lost, and I see it so clearly now. As long as there was a person there looking for awakening, there was a separate person there. You know, and that's what I couldn't seem to shake off. You know, and however much I tried, I couldn't get rid of me. I couldn't get rid of the separate me. You know, and at one point it was seen. It was even seen that I couldn't awaken. So then the focus became, I have to get rid of me. I have to get rid of the self. And what I couldn't see then, you see, was that it was a self trying to get rid of a self.
That's right. Yeah.
There's these vicious circles of thought, you know, and it got more and more subtle. Actually, it got more and more subtle. The seeking went on in more and more subtle ways. As the seeking was seen through in that way, it carried on. It's like the mind didn't want to give up. It didn't want to give up, you know. And it didn't want to give up this idea that one day I'll awaken, you know. And all I can say is that somehow in the midst of that, it all fell away. But it certainly wasn't something that I did. Because in all my effort to do that, I was just reinforcing the sense of me. I'm a separate person.
But if you hadn't done it, would it have fallen away? I guess we don't know.
Well, you see, this is the question, isn't it? It's the central question. I mean, what was seen so clearly was that it was already here, it was already complete.
Yeah.
The awakening, whatever you want to call it, oneness that I was looking for was already here. But you see, it wasn't something that I could have. It can't be possessed, it can't be grasped, and it's actually the grasping, the attempt to grasp it. That's how we apparently lose it.
You know, it's an incredible dilemma for a spiritual seeker, and I would include myself in that category. It's like, on the one hand, and I've heard over the years many people talk in a similar way to you. On the one hand, you can't get what you want. On the other hand, you can't not try. It's like you still have to live your life. You still have to follow your heart. You have to follow where you feel life's taking you, and you might go up 1,000 wrong turnings, but you don't have to do it. And that's the amazing adventure of it, really. And it's somehow very inspiring to meet someone like you, although I know you feel there isn't someone there. But to feel that you did all this, and okay, end of the day, something opened, something changed. And your desperation, your unhappiness, your depression dropped away for whatever reason.
But you see, this was seen, the beauty of this, you see, it was seen right in the midst of that despair.
No, well, I can get that because I've spoken to other people that have been in this situation. I get that, yeah.
Yeah. All my life, all the seeking, I thought the despair was a block. It's like I had to overcome the despair before I could awaken.
Yeah.
What was seen as this was already the case, right at the heart of life, right at the heart of what I took to be my life. It was seen that it wasn't mine at all. You know, no matter what was happening in my life, there was that freedom there that could never leave because it wasn't something that I had. It was something that was there. And it has nothing to do with me. And yet, you see, it's what you were saying, it's like it just sits there. It just sits there and allows the seeking to play itself out, you see. Throughout all my seeking and suffering, there had only ever been oneness, just that I couldn't see it. And yet there had still only been oneness, you see. And yet this whole seeking and suffering game had played itself out perfectly. That was also seen too. That was seen too, that it couldn't have been otherwise, that the seeking had exhausted itself. You know, when it was ready, and really that it had nothing to do with me. And I remember when I saw this, I saw it in a chair. You know, I was in my bedroom at home, and I was looking at a chair, and suddenly it's like everything fell away, and I realised I'd never seen the chair before. Because I was too busy looking for something so much more than the chair, looking for something for me, looking for awakening, liberation, and light, always in the future. So I'd missed the chair. And something funny happens then, you see, in that when that seeking falls away, it's like the chair reveals its secret, that it's oneness, like it's oneness disguised as a chair. And actually it's not a chair at all, you see, that's the thing. We call it a chair. It's like we call it a chair so we don't have to see it. It's like, oh, I know it's a chair, I know it's a table, I know, you know. But when that falls away, it's like it can't be known, you know. It's not a chair at all. It is what it is, and it's very alive. You know, everything becomes very alive. And yeah, we can still call it a chair. We can still use ordinary language. We can still function, you know, as if we were leading a very ordinary life. And yet, underneath, it's all the miracle. It's all the miracle. But the thing is, I always say it's nothing like you thought it would be. It's nothing like you thought it would be. The moment you have an idea of what awakening is, that's just an idea. You know, awakening, it's too alive to ever be captured, to ever be known.
And you had a few of these experiences and there's one in your book you mentioned about how you were walking through the rain in a cold autumn evening in Oxford, and there you say you suddenly realised I was everything, I was home. So presumably these situations arose more frequently, and then something got stronger. Is that right? Is that how you felt?
Well, you know, when this was first seen, it was very dramatic. It was very dramatic. It was almost shocking to see that the secret had been with me from the beginning, and it was right at the heart of this very ordinary life, you know. That the extraordinary was always there. It was always hidden in the most ordinary of things. And when that was first seen, there was a great excitement to it. There was a drama about it. It was, you know, and you know, these days it's become very ordinary. The whole thing's kind of quiet. It's gently kind of quieted down. It's become very gentle, very ordinary. It's there in the background, but it's not so dramatic. You know, it's like the whole thing collapses back down into a very ordinary life, on the surface anyway. But certainly at the time there were all sorts of experiences, you know, all sorts of experiences. You know, yeah, I mean, walking in the park on that day, you know, and the rain coming down, and there was just love. That's all there was, and everything was a manifestation of love, you know, and nothing was separate from what I took to be myself. And at the time it was very dramatic, you know. It was very dramatic. It was also new. But really, even that's died away now, you know, even that's died away. It's just become very gentle, very ordinary. Was there any element of fear when these things happened at all? Anxiety? Or? Yeah, well, you see, what happens is, you know, it's like the mind falls away and there's just oneness, there's just what is, and it's so clear, it's so obvious, and it can't be known and it can't be spoken of. But it's undeniably the case, you know, and really there's no time to it, and there's no everything falls away. But then the mind comes back in, and it's then that it begins to talk about it and write about it, and it says, I had an experience that happened to me. actually you weren't there. It didn't happen to you. You weren't there. It's almost out of fear that the mind comes back in and tries to grasp it, tries to put some sort of structure there. You know, the mind craves structure because it's known, it's secure.
See, the reason I asked that was I read this book a few years ago by Suzanne Segal, Collision with the Infinite. I don't know if you know this book, but she had, it would appear, similar experiences to you. And she went through tremendous anxiety for many years. In the end, ironically, she died of a brain hemorrhage. I don't know if that was part to do with the anxiety. But, as you're hinting at, presumably the anxiety is to do with that the mind's still hanging around.
It's still the mind hanging on.
Yeah.
It's almost the last tactic it uses.
Yeah.
It uses the fear tactic, you know. Like there's something to fear, there's something to fear, there's something to fear. Actually, there's just the fear. There's just fear arising. There's nothing to fear.
So, no, that's an interesting subject, fear and anxiety. So where you are, where you live these days, do you have fear and anxiety sometimes? Does it arise sometimes?
I mean, the point is, anything can arise in this. It's just that, I mean, fear, anxiety, not really anymore. I'm not saying they can't arise though, because the point about this is that anything is allowed in this. Fear is allowed in this. Anger is allowed in this. Joy is allowed in this. Sadness is allowed in this. It's like everything is allowed to arise when it arises, but there's just nobody there anymore trying to do anything with it, trying to resist it, trying to fight it, trying to get an identity out of it. And it's almost impossible to talk about, but say that there can be sadness there. You say if, your mother dies, there can be sadness. People have this idea of, this awakened state where you don't feel anything. It's just this empty kind of nothingness and nothing affects. That's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. That's just another idea. It's another concept. This allows everything. Oneness, how could oneness not? Oneness is everything. So everything is allowed in this. So sadness can be there. And when sadness is there, there's sadness. It's undeniable. But there's just nobody there anymore trying to do anything with sadness. And the funny thing happens then, the sadness just lives its own little life and burns itself up in its own time.
So it's not charged at all.
There's no
it's not
charge
supported.
to it. There's no charge.
Yeah.
And yet, so in that, sadness is allowed to be fully sad. And it can be seen. It's like in the midst of sadness, or anger, or fear, it can be seen that there's sadness there, and yet there's no sadness there. And this is a place the mind could never go.
Yes.
The mind could never go. That there's sadness there, but because there's nobody there who is sad, there's no sad person. Actually, the sadness isn't there. Because really, even to call it sadness, there has to be a person there, calling it something, labelling it. So, it's impossible to talk about, really, and it's impossible to understand. That there can be sadness there, undeniably, living its own life, and yet there is no sadness. And in that...
But it's a lack of identification, primarily, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like you see the camera, but somehow, okay, you may feel at one with the camera. I don't know how you look at that.
I feel
the
very much
cameraman,
at two with
Craig
the camera
over there, but you're watching. Is that right? You're watching something. Is that the right way of putting it? Maybe it's not.
All this is, it's being registered. It's like it's effortless. We think that we need to do this. We think that we need to do the hearing. We think that we need to do the seeing. We think that we need to do the breathing. Actually, this is all happening effortlessly. There's an intelligence happening here that's it's completely beyond the mind. The mind has no hope of grasping this. But it's what is beating the heart, and it's what's breathing.
But that's the human body, which is an incredible, intricate mechanism.
Yeah. And the point is, the human body, the body doesn't need us. It's the hardest thing to see.
I understand that.
Yeah, the body doesn't need us. We are really irrelevant. It doesn't need our seeking. It doesn't need our suffering. It doesn't even need our identity. It functions effortlessly without us. It's the hardest thing to see to someone who's so attached to their teachings and their becoming someone, to see that really you're irrelevant. You're absent. You're absent. And yet, it's not a dead, cold, detached absence. It's a very alive, very full absence that's full with everything that's happening. It's very live. Actually, that absence is absolute presence. So we talk about, being present, being in the now. Actually, when you're fully in the now, you're not there. So really, you can't be present. It's not something that you can do. But it's there, even in the absence of you.
The ironical thing, though, is that's one of the first things that you try and learn when you go on a spiritual path, is to be present.
Yeah.
And you kind of, you can, there's the sort of Bennett or Gurdjieff type exercises in being present. So you're not spacing out, because most of us, it's not that we're, you talk about being absent, but we're really absent because we're spacing out and thinking about something else.
That's the thing. That's the
and
thing.
It's almost as if you have to learn to try and be present. And I say try and be present because that's possibly right. You can't be completely present, but there's somehow a mechanism in doing that which brings you, ironically, closer to being present than when you're just spacing out and thinking about something else and being completely unaware.
Yeah. But actually what was seen over here was that there was only presence. There's only presence. And it's not something that we have, so we can't lose it. And everything is happening within that. So even all the seeking and the spacing out and the suffering is already happening in the most perfect present. It's what holds everything. It's like everything is already embraced. Oneness is already embracing everything. And it denies nothing, it resists nothing. It even allows the most intense suffering to play itself out. But really, and this is seen in the image of the cross, Jesus on the cross, that at the heart of the most intense suffering, the most intense suffering known to man, right at the heart of that is God, is eternal life, is eternity. It's not to be found through as an escape from suffering. It's right at the heart of suffering, and it's like right at the heart of the most intense suffering, it can be seen that there's nobody there who suffers.
But you see, that's interesting, because let's say you've probably seen the TV recently, the suffering in Burma and China, the cyclone and the earthquake. People lost their homes, their loved ones, they've got nowhere to live, they may be injured and there's no medical help. There's a lot of suffering there. Does that affect you at all? How is that you see those pictures and you feel interconnectedness somehow, or interconnectedness is something happening?
Well, yeah, it's myself in Burma. It's myself, in the earthquake, it's myself starving in Africa.
That's right. Yeah.
It really is. It really is, because it's all one. So people sometimes hear the message of non-duality and they think it's about sitting back and doing nothing. They think it's about sitting back and just seeing, it's all just a dream. It's all just a story. There's no one there suffering. Actually, in the clear seeing that there's nobody here who suffers, and that suffering is just a story, that there can be effortless action to help where help is needed, but it comes from a place where you just don't know. It comes from a place of not knowing. It's like, the way I say it sometimes, it's like oneness recognises itself in that starving child and moves to help itself. Not because I'm a separate person, I feel pity for you and I need to be a good person, so I'm going to help you. That's nothing to do with it. It doesn't come from a place of a set morality. It's like in the seeing that it's all one. Somehow, and this is the mystery of the universe, this is the mystery of the universe, somehow it moves to help itself because it only sees itself. So it sees itself as the starving child, it sees itself as the earthquake victim. And then it moves to do something, if that's possible. Or it might not, it might not. But there's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing. It comes from that place of no thought, of not knowing. It doesn't come from a place where I'm separate from you and I'm suffering because you're suffering and I feel pity for you and I'm going to try and be a good person. It doesn't need that. The universe doesn't need our pity. It doesn't actually need our suffering. Just to see it in clarity is to end it. And then there can be a movement to help.
And what form might that movement to help
take? There's no way of knowing.
Yeah.
There's no way of knowing. It's like the moment you have an idea of what you should do to help, the moment you have a set agenda, it's like, the moment you think the most important thing in the world is saving the rainforest, you might miss the old lady who's crossing the road and who needs your help at that moment, The moment you're coming from a set idea of what's right and what's wrong and what needs to be done, you might miss the old lady who in that moment is more important than all the rainforests because she's there and she's in front of you, and she is yourself. So this comes from a place of, there's no structure to it, there's no way of knowing, but somehow, and I don't understand it, and no one understands it, it's just the mystery of creation. Somehow oneness recognises itself. It's God meeting himself, you know. You could use the word God. It's God seeing himself everywhere.
So what motivates you and kind of keeps you going, and you do your talks and you write books and you got things up on YouTube and things. What form does that motivation take?
You know, I really don't know. I really don't know where it comes from. This is all, I mean, if I'm absolutely honest, the way it feels is that it's just all happened. It seems so clearly that this is really beyond my control. It's like Jeff could never have done this. The moment Jeff tried, the moment I had tried to make this happen, it would have failed miserably. This is just, I mean, it sounds almost naive. It sounds kind of that I'm trying to be clever or something in a way by saying that. But that's really what it feels like. You know, it really feels effortless. That it's just unfolded. It's just evolved, and you know, I don't know. I really don't know how this has happened or why it's happened. But it appears to have happened, and somehow this expression of non-duality seems to come out of this mouth, you know, and it surprises me.
Because you were telling me earlier, before we started, you used to be very shy.
Yeah.
And you actually went into at Cambridge, you studied astrophysics. Yeah. And you did that partly because you had to communicate with people. And here you're talking away, no problem.
I know, but it's astonishing. I mean, I just don't know. I sit in these meetings or talking to you, and the words come out, and sometimes, you know, it's almost like, if I could put it into words, it's like I sit back and watch these words coming out, and sometimes they surprise me. Sometimes I'm shocked at what comes out, you know, because it's almost like I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have said that.
But isn't that like a little bit, if you talk to the real, or hear what they've said or written, the real geniuses of our times, you know, the Einsteins and people, they don't really credit themselves with coming up with an idea. They say, well, it just came.
It's just coming out of nothing. It emerges, and you talk to...
you're like a vehicle for something happening.
Yeah, but it's nothing to do with me, though. I mean, the moment you
well, let's say you're this body.
It seems to emerge. It seems to emerge effortlessly because it's talking about itself. You know, there's no effort in talking about this because there's nothing to talk about. It's like what we're really talking about here is nothing. It's no object. It can't be pinned down. It can't be known. In that, it's effortless because it's seen that really the moment we utter the first word about this, we're already into duality. We're already into the dream. You know, so it's seen. Once it's seen in clarity that this really can't be spoken about. The words, and don't ask me how, they seem to come, and it's like I sit back and watch. If I could put it into words, it's like I watch these words come out, and I don't know what's going to come out next. But you ask. My girlfriend is an artist, and she talks about this. And a lot of artists talk about. I've talked to a lot of artists about this, and they say the same thing. It's like when you're really into the art, you know, it's so clear. It's just coming out of nowhere. It's doing itself. It's emerging from nothing. You know, it's like creation. It's like the point of creation. It's creation and destruction. It's happening, and it's really all that's ever happening. It's happening now. This is creation and destruction, and it's the miracle, really. And it can't be known, it can't be understood, but that's the beauty of it. If it could be understood, it would be a thing. It would be a concept. This is just pure not knowing. It's openness. It is what it is. But in the absence of that seeking, the mystery just reveals itself, and it reveals itself in not just the talking, but in everything, in the plants and the flowers and the chairs and the trousers and tables, and you know, it's everything is the mystery. It's something coming out of nothing. It's like the very fact that this is happening at all. You know, that's it. You know, that's the miracle.
Well, I remember reading something about the formation of our planet, and it's you were saying, telling me earlier again that you didn't really like astrophysics because it was really just mathematics, and I forget who wrote this, but it's something about if if our planet, and on a mathematical point of view, was just a tiny, tiny fraction different from the way it was, it couldn't host human life. And I think that's one of the things that we forget, the delicate balance of everything. And that's when I talk with you, that's the feeling I get. Everything's an incredible delicate balance. You don't really know why it happens. It happens the way it is, and it just seems that some kind of shift in you happened all those years ago, or a shift happened, and not much happened, but it was so significant. And it is this kind of thing of realising how intricate and delicate and fine everything is.
And how precious it is.
How precious it is, yeah.
And how far away from that we move in our seeking, in our search to be someone.
Yeah.
That preciousness right at the heart of life. The preciousness that's really, it's always there and it's always happening. And we just miss it because we're too busy looking for something. You know. But really nothing happened to me, you know. The only difference, you know, it's like nothing's really changed. There's still an ordinary life being lived. It's just seen that no one's living that life. It's living itself. It's oneness playing itself out in the form of an apparent separate person. You know, but essentially there's no difference between you and me. It's oneness looking out through these eyes, oneness looking out through those eyes. And really, oneness has no preferences. Oneness is equally happy looking out through these eyes and hearing through these ears as it is looking out through those eyes. The only thing that separates us is this story, the story of me, which is so fragile, which can fall away just like that, leaving only presence. You know, and it's just the miracle that's right at the heart of life. Right at the heart of life, right there. You know, in the midst of the messiness of human life. When that's seen, it's shocking because it destroys all seeking, it burns up all seeking. And it leaves you here.
And people just get so lost. That's the sad thing in one way, amazing thing in another way.
Yeah, because it really couldn't be any other way. And maybe that's the suffering and seeking of a lifetime. It's there to show us this.
Yeah.
And really nothing's out of place right from the very beginning, from the Big Bang, you know, from the preciousness of that, how fragile that was, that nothing's been out of place, you know, and it leaves us here.
Yeah.
It leaves us here.
That's a great way to finish, Jeff. I really appreciate you coming. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for watching Conscious TV. I did promise Jeff's publisher that I would do a plug for his book. Here it is, Non-Duality Press. Thank you.